panel briefly. Christy is the founder of Sealight Technologies. She's working here at Skydeck. She got her PhD at Berkeley in vision science, and Sealight helps track eye movement to diagnose diseases earlier than was possible. Charles is the founder and CEO of Berkeley Brewing Science, where they use engineered yeast to more sustainably make beer and add extra flavors to make the beer tasty. And Alex is the founder of Fortifite, got his PhD at Berkeley in postdoc, and then took that research to start Fortifite, where engineer crops to be more disease resistant.
So that's why
yeah, I want to start by thanking you guys, and then if you want to talk a little bit about sort of how you went from taking your research from the lab, and then how you actually thought about going through it to how you're doing today in the company.
Great, sounds good. Yeah, so I started at Berkeley over 10 years ago, first as a graduate student, and I started off doing pretty basic science. And I really liked the work I was doing, but as I went through my PhD, I wanted to do work that was a little bit more applied. I kept seeing a lot of really good work that would kind of end with a publication, and then the next project would start. And a lot of times that work would not make it into industry and not be commercialized after that publication. And so for my postdoc, I wanted to do work that was a little bit more applied. So I went from doing kind of basic plant cell wall research as a graduate student to doing plant disease resistance as a postdoc. And so the thinking there was, how can we take some of the new technology being developed, CRISPR-Cas9 technology, genome sequencing technology, DNA synthesis technology, and kind of apply this to really important problems facing agriculture today. And so I worked as a postdoc for just over 3 years, working on developing that and learning about that. And all throughout this time, I was kind of thinking about, what's the best way to kind of take some of this technology and turn it into a company? And what's the best business model to do that? And how do I start to build a team and get funding to move in that direction? And it was a long process. It was a slow process. But eventually the work for my postdoc worked out really well. And we ended up filing 2 patents with UC Berkeley. And in 2017, I got some grant funding to start the company. And we were able to license some of that technology from Berkeley and then get started here. We're able to get some lab space on campus. And so that grant funding, that kind of got us started, got us set up with a few people, and then led to more grant funding. So the SBIR program, which you guys have probably heard about before, that's been a really good program for us, and I think the other founders have also taken advantage of that. So that's been really good. And the one thing I would say is that there's so many great resources here at Berkeley, BPEP being one of those, Skydeck, and some other incubator spaces here in Berkeley that have all helped provide resources for us to kind of learn as we go and develop the company and develop the business. And so we're 2 years old. We're still pretty small. We have 3 people right now. We've been able to make some great progress further developing the technology and the science. And so we're still very early, but we have a great start. And I'd encourage anyone who's interested to give it a shot. It is hard. It is a lot of work. But being at a place like Berkeley is one of the best places in the world to take science from the lab and move it into industry.
Hi everyone, I'm Christy. I'm CEO and co-founder of Sealight Technologies. And so it was mentioned we are a neurotech and AI company. So we use eye motion to assess neurological health. And our go-to market is in the multiple sclerosis space. So my path was a little bit different, I guess, in coming to my PhD. I was an engineer for an undergrad, and I worked a while as an engineer doing laser science at Corning, and decided that the clean room life was not for me. And so I decided I wanted to go back to school. I had loved working there because they paid for my master's at the time, so that was a really great perk of being an engineer after undergrad. But then decided to go back to to school here at Berkeley because the company did layoffs and they got rid of my whole department. And so at that point it was, what do I want to do with my life? And so I wanted to go back and really apply the optical engineering to something more biomedical. And so I started my PhD here at Cal in 2010. And it was during my PhD that I developed the technology that we use at Sealight. And I co-founded the company with another vision science PhD student. So my background was the engineering. He was more of the neuroscientist, understanding more of the mechanisms of the brain and how vision worked. And so together we founded Sealight, and we got our first SBIR grant in 2016, and that really helped the company to take off. That was actually first starting with concussion. So we did a little bit of a pivot with our work, which will be pretty common amongst startups, that you might come in thinking you have a very particular path and then realize soon that that path isn't as lucrative or as successful as you think it might be, and then you pivot in order to keep on a successful route. So we first started with concussion and then moved to multiple sclerosis, got another NIH phase 1 grant. This time it was an STTR. So that's very similar to an SBIR, but it requires a university partner. So we partnered with UCSF and did our grant with multiple sclerosis there. And so we've gone through a lot of accelerators, a lot of Berkeley resources. Free Ventures is where we first started out. It was by students for students, and it's an accelerator on campus. The people that started that have actually now gone on to be the house. So Jeremy and Cam that raised the money for the house fund here, they were the ones who founded Free Ventures. So we did that. NIH, which is very similar to NSF, has a type of I-Corps program where you can go through and do all of the customer interviews. We went through that program through NIH, which is a 9-month program specific for medical devices. And now we're here at Skydeck. So we're really appreciative of all the Berkeley resources that we've been able to utilize in order to help us really get our idea off the ground.
Cool. Yeah, so my story is similar to Alex's in that I came to Cal for my PhD, and it was very, very basic science oriented. I worked in a lab studying genetics and evolution of brewer's yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And I too, at the end of that process, so I started here in 06 for my PhD, graduated in 12. And then I too had this, like, I want to do something more applied now. So I went and did a postdoc with a guy named Jake Kiesling. He is sort of famous for engineering microbes to do various things. At the time he was really working on biofuels. So I started in that lab ostensibly to be studying biofuels or engineering microbes to make biofuels, and I always wanted to do a startup, like ever since I came to grad school. I was interested, and so throughout my postdoc, I was very much like looking for opportunities, and at some point I got together with some of my buddies and started homebrewing, not really thinking that that was going to lead to, that was more of just like, we were all beer nerds and kind of I was interested in how the process worked, so we started homebrewing in my garage in Berkeley, and then I just got really interested in the process, and you know, you make the first batch of beer and it's terrible, you know, like you can hardly drink it. So I started getting interested in how to make better beer, reading these brewing science books, and that's kind of where I came up with this idea of, well, a lot of the flavor compounds that come from hops, which is this billion-dollar crop and sort of is the lifeblood of the brewing industry, like, shouldn't we be able to engineer yeast to make those flavors instead of having to rely on the agricultural product? And then, you know, long story short, there's like a fairly good value proposition. Apart from saving brewers money, it's also engineering yeast to do the flavor production is more consistent. It improves yield. It's more scalable. And there's a sort of laundry list of value props. So I started developing this technology in the lab. Actually gave the project to an undergrad because, you know, I was busy. I was like really busy working on my biofuels work. The undergrad made sort of some really awesome first steps towards a proof of principle. And then I basically teamed up with a graduate student that was in Jay's lab. She really, took the wheel of the project and kept pushing on it. And then in about 2016, I presented some of the work that we had done at the World Brewing Congress, which is this big conference. It's like the most technical conference that brewing scientists go to. It's cool, like instead of having coffee breaks at 10:15, they just have like a table full of different beers, which is like a little unusual coming from basic science and whatnot. And I got some interest from some like very, very big brewing companies, and that made me think that maybe there was something there. So I kept working on the technology at the lab, and then in 2017 I decided to write one of these SBIR grants, and we got the grant, and that kind of that gave me the sort of kick in the ass that was required to like actually get me out of my postdoc and start the company. So we started that in 2017, me and the graduate student who I worked with, and we worked on that phase 1 SBIR grant for almost a year, and then we started getting to the point where the grant was, you'd see the horizon on the grant, and we figured we were going to apply for this phase 2 grant, but we needed money to kind of bridge the gap. So we ended up going out and raising a friends and family round. And then when we did that, we got a lot of interest from venture. And so then we ended up raising like a bigger venture round. And also winning the phase 2 grant. So we were able to build the company a bit. Now we're 10 people. And we are, we're sort of, yeah, I think I maybe answered the question.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Sorry, that was long-winded.
You guys all kind of talked a little bit about it, but what was, especially Charles, what was like the time you knew you wanted to actually start a company? Was it like going into your postdoc, or was there like a specific instance?
I would say one of the big motivators for me was like I liked doing science, I liked doing bench work, but I didn't always like doing a project by myself. So I was like working with undergrads and with other grad students and postdocs. And I always thought like, if we just got a really good team together and everyone worked on the same thing, we could make a lot of progress. So that was a big motivator for me. Like if I start a company, then we can do this. We can build a team, we can get everybody together. And I was always excited to make progress. Science is fun when it works. And the best way to do that is to get a bunch of really good people all working together. So from that perspective, starting a company was a great way to do that. And really, get the best parts of science and get some benefits out of that.
So I think for me, during my PhD, when I started to go to conferences and present art and the technology that I had, there were many different institutions asking if I could build one for them. And I ended up going to Germany for a summer and creating a research device similar to what we have now, a little different. And it was then that I realized when people kept asking, can you build this, that there would be interest, or that my labor should no longer be a free grad student with that. And so that kind of helped to motivate me to co-found the company and start writing the grants in order to help create this device to give to many customers.
Yeah, I always kind of had the itch, and then I nearly got derailed several times. Like I was deciding between doing a postdoc in an applied biology lab and just like going into industry, and had I done that, I maybe never would have started a company. But you going into Jay's lab, and the reason that I went into Jay's lab is because they have a history of entrepreneurship, and so that made it seem a little bit more realistic to me. And then when the first year, 2, 3 years, it's like starting a company out of it all still seemed kind of unrealistic. And it really wasn't until we got awarded that grant when I was like, oh, I guess we're actually going to do this. It was. I think you alluded to this a little bit. in your response, like transitioning from this seems like unrealistic to like this is I'm going to do this is really just this very sort of subtle psychological transition. So I probably, like looking back, I probably should have taken the plunge sooner. But yeah, it took like getting that kind of push from the NSF to really do it.
I guess once you like decided that you're gonna do it, what was like the first thing to do? Secure funding, like talk to your PI about IP stuff, or like what was kind of like the first thing you had to do?
So for me, it was important to talk to my PI, since the technology was developed in his lab through my PhD there. And he was very supportive, said he had no entrepreneurial interests or experience, and so if I wanted to go forth, I could, but he would be of little help. And I was okay with that. I said, as long as I have your support scientifically, that should be fine. And so once I knew that, we incorporated, because to apply for all these different types of grants, you have to actually be an entity and incorporate yourself. So QB3 had a program, Startup in a Box, that allowed you to incorporate and get all the early business documentation for only $250. So that was a really cheap way for us to create our company and get all the documentation we would need for future employees. And then we did a QB3 workshop on small business grants to the NIH. And that was very helpful for us to get that funding.
What's the name of that corporation package?
QB3 Startup in a Box. So if you search online QB3, Startup in a Box, you can apply for that, and they select groups that they take through the Startup in a Box program. And it's just $250 for all to become a business, which is very cheap compared to Bay Area lawyers.
So this question is for each of you. So we're all here expecting 3 different answers. How many times did you get turned down before you got funding? And how long did that take? Like a couple of months or a couple of years?
So we incorporated in 2014 and applied for our first round of funding. Didn't get any of those funds because we had originally thought that the retina was where you should use eye trackers for. But ophthalmologists didn't have the market fit. They didn't need our accuracy. And so we applied in 2015 for neurological disease. And that's where the concussion idea had happened. The first grant we submitted for concussion was turned down. The second one was awarded. So it was a year and a half of trying for grants until we got that first one. But really, if you know your product market fit before applying, you won't need to do that kind of cycle. So that was like our learning period for what our device could really be used the best for. After that, we got some angel funding. So we got $100K in angel funding to help kind of bridge that gap. And then we applied for another grant in 2018. First time, didn't get it. Second time, got it. So it's really, entrepreneurship in general is a game of perseverance. And so, yeah, there's definitely a lot of no's. And right now we're trying to raise funds again, and there's always going to be the no's that are there too. We're waiting for the next yes.
Yeah, so I spent a fair amount of time thinking about the business before we ever applied. So probably the first thing I did was start building my network, figuring out if people actually want this product, like what's the best thing to do, the best way to frame it. And then that was probably over 2 years before I actually applied for funding. The first grant I applied for, we actually got through UC Berkeley. So that was kind of lucky, I think, to get it the first time. The second and third grants we applied for, we didn't get. So the first 2 SBIRs, we were rejected for both of them, but we did get some good feedback, and we kind of knew we were on the right track from that feedback. So we improved our applications and kind of made more progress with the science, and then our third and fourth SBIR grants that we applied for, we got both of those. And so it's definitely a bit of a numbers game, keep applying, but also keep improving. Because even if you fail, you get good feedback and you get good experience about how to do it better the next time. We were just talking a little bit earlier about the SBIR application process. And it's a very complex and intimidating process. And even just going through it once, you learn a tremendous amount about how to do a better job the next time.
Yeah, and every agency's different. That's about the thing that. So as far as like understanding product market fit stuff, I think that's why I always talk about how I went to this conference. I went to this brewing science conference, and just getting some of the biggest brewers in the world, like these global breweries, sitting me down and saying like, you need to do this. This is a great idea. That was kind of the turning point for me in terms of like, okay, I should do this. And then I wrote this SBIR grant, and that got funded. That was the first grant that I had written. And then, we dealt with quite a bit of rejection after that. So lucky to get the first grant, because you never know, maybe we wouldn't have done it had we not won that first grant. Then as far as fundraising went, I spoke with, during our like angel investment round, I spoke with, probably 30 angels. 5 to 8 of them ended up investing. And then I'm not really sure how we were like, we finished the angel round and we're getting interest from venture. I'm not really sure how we decided we were actually going to go that route. We decided that we were going to, and then we probably had another 20 meetings with with VCs and got one term sheet. And decided they'd be it was a good term sheet, so we decided that we'd go with them. And then we've also submitted another an SBIR grant to the USDA and an STTR grant to the NIH, and we were rejected on both of those, but the reviewers did write some fairly encouraging things about reapplying, so we ended up we're reapplying for both of those in the next couple months, basically. So hopefully we'll get them on this second time around.
When will your product yeast be on the market?
It is on the market. Yeah. So we've worked with about 30 breweries at this point who have basically just asked for our yeast, and we just sell them a pitchable quantity of our yeast, and they make anywhere between 3 and 100 barrels of beer with yeast. So Fieldwork is a local brewery around in Berkeley that has used our yeast to make beer, and then we've been more recently trying to kind of work with larger partners, but none of that has hit the shelves yet.
So, you guys, none of you have a formal business background, or maybe you have a little bit, Christy, of some business?
No, for my master's, I had a concentration in business, but like, what does that actually mean?
Okay. So how did you go about learning about the business side of things? Or did you find somebody to do that for you?
Yeah, so I guess for me, most of it was through networking. So talking to other people that had started a company or had worked at an early startup company. That was super useful. One of the things that one of my friends said to me pretty early on, he said, starting a company requires you to know an exponentially increasing amount of things, but you can really only learn at a linear rate. And the way to kind of bridge this gap between what you need to know and what you can learn is to have a strong network of people. So when you are not sure how to solve a problem, you can find someone in your network who can have some suggestions or can connect you to someone who can help out with solving that problem. So I think not trying to know everything about business is probably the best solution. Learn what you can, but then really work on building your network so that you can have a strong group of people that you can go to get advice and feedback when you don't know the answer.
I think for us it was really accelerator based. So my co-founder and I, it was just us two recently until the last year. And so going through free ventures and then the Coulter Foundation through NIH, and now Skydeck as well. They really teach you how to transition your science talk to a pitch deck and to make it more valuable for the business community. And so those have been absolutely invaluable for us in terms of how to size our market, how to do product market fit, you know, all these different things that you don't learn as a PhD or a postdoc. Accelerators do a really, really great job in a really quick way to kind of teach you the nuts and bolts, and then you try it out in the world. Very recently, we've taken on a chief business officer, so a Haas student now has joined our team, and it's been really great to have him because he's doing a lot of our economic modeling and things that take it even a step further, and so we really appreciate that extra expertise so that Zach and I can focus on the product and some other areas where we're better suited.
I've got questions about finding a business partner at Haas. That sounds interesting. But I'll say, for me, two things. One is, one of my co-founders has a business background, so that's great. And then, in addition to that, tapping like the Berkeley alum network of other folks that have started companies that are now thriving, and just basically asking them for advice. You'll be really pleasantly surprised by how willing other people that have walked the path are to help you when you're trying to walk the path. Like two of my, an alum of my postdoc lab started another company called Lygos, which is in Berkeley as well, and they are now, I don't know, 100 people or something like that. They've done the several rounds of fundraising. They've done the deals. They've done all that stuff, and just having him to sort of mentor me was immensely valuable. And like look at my pitch deck and tell me like that it sucked, and then giving me suggestions on how to fix it, and going through that process with him multiple times. And then another one of my mentors, a computer science PhD from Cal, who ended up starting a e-discovery company, and he started his company 8 years ago, and he's walked the path, and just like I can take any question to him and he'll give me the best advice. So I would say reach out to other founders when you're trying to start a company.
Is there anything you do different back beginning and starting a company?
One thing so I was a sole founder of the company. I'm still kind of a sole founder. And that worked out okay. But I think at the beginning, if I had to do it over, I would push harder to find a co-founder before I actually started it. I think that would have been really useful and made it more fun and less stressful as I was getting through the early part of the process.
I think for me, we would have done a little bit more product market fit prior to doing that first SBIR with the retina space. That was about 1.5 years of time of thinking through how do we resubmit this grant and really working through figuring that out. And had we done that earlier on, it might have been 2 less grant submissions. So that would have been really helpful.
We made a lot of mistakes, but I don't know that I was in a position to really, do them any differently. And nothing crazy, but like, I know, maybe one of the most, so getting familiar with business was a major challenge for me. So going on customer visits, the NSF is my experience with the phase 1 NSF grant was good in that they made me go and interview 30 customers. Did they do that with you guys? Okay, so those interviews were great. I mean, I'm good at asking people questions and like, what are your problems? Like, how can I solve them? That was great. But then one of the things that I learned is that if you're selling a service to somebody, like you are their servant, and you can't go into a business meeting and say like, well, I know you want to do something that way, but like, I think you should do it that way. Like that's a non-starter. So stuff like that, and I would do differently if I were to have those back. But looking back at where I was, I needed to make that mistake for myself, and I'm sure there are lots of things that I'm doing right now that I'll look back on myself like 2 years from now and be like, oh God, like being such an idiot. But right now, it's just, you're just learning a lot.
How is the IP transfer process? We were talking a little bit about it earlier.
Yeah, we had a great experience with. We filed a patent with UC Berkeley, and we were able to negotiate an exclusive license with terms that were pretty favorable. I think they were like, "Wait, you're doing what? You're doing a beer startup? Like, good luck to you." Like, I don't think they saw that much value in the technology. So either that, or they were. I don't really know how it came about, but we got very good terms on the exclusive license. And I don't know if my former advisor had anything to do with that. I don't know if our relationship with IRPRA, whatever the acronym is, had anything to do with it. But it was a really positive experience. I've heard bad experiences from other UCs. Like one of my friends who is dealing with IP from UCLA has said that they're trying to take an absurd amount of the royalties from their deals, but yeah, our experience was really favorable.
We're kind of going through the finalizing stages of our license right now. So we did some letters of intent along the way because we didn't have the money needed to fully execute on it, and so just knowing kind of how much it will cost in general is important. But we did 3 letters of intent. Each were like $1,500 to take us through during a certain time period. And then now with our Skydeck money, we're now executing. So we have an exclusive license. There was a lot of push and pull on equity versus upfront cash versus all those different levers you can pull. And so I think right now we're sitting in a place where it's pretty good. But I think initially we were shocked a little bit at like, whoa, how much do they want? But it seems like when talking with our lawyer who does this all the time that we got relatively decent normal terms. So nothing to be worried about.
Yeah, so I had a somewhat similar experience. So we filed 2 patents with UC Berkeley, and then we ended up getting exclusive licenses for both of those. But it was a long process, so it was probably more than a year between when we started talking to Berkeley and when we actually got the license signed, and a lot of back and forth on the terms. The advice I would give is, everything is negotiable in those licenses. Berkeley does a lot of work with, biomedical technology, and the agriculture side is pretty different in terms of the amounts of money that things can lead to. And so one thing that was really valuable was for me to find some examples of similar technology that had already been commercialized and be able to show what that was worth and how much money it took to develop that and turn that into a product. And so actually, going to them with some numbers and saying, this is similar to that, and it's worth this much, it's going to take this long, was very valuable. It sort of gave me a way to peg the valuation at a place that was reasonable for us. And then it also gave Berkeley a good incentive, because Berkeley doesn't really know what the technology is worth most of the time. They say a lot of different things, and they're not necessarily an expert in those things. And so if you can come to them with a real-world example, it helps them feel more comfortable changing to a valuation that will work for a startup company.
So I don't know how many of you have using the previous labs technology. So there is any kind of the conflict of interest when you're starting to using the technology and talking to PI. So that if there is some kind of problem, how do you deal with that kind of conflict?
It's not easy. I think every situation is different. I was kind of in a strange spot because there was another organization that was interested in licensing the technology that I had sort of developed at my postdoc. And that organization had provided some funding to the lab that I was working in, even though they didn't fund
So you
that
get
specific
3-5
project.
programs?
Yeah, so there's a question of, did they have an option to license that or not? And even if they didn't, should they get it anyways because they had given other money to Berkeley into this lab? And so that was a bit of a tricky situation, because a postdoc has a much smaller voice than a professor. So it ended up working out okay, but it certainly was tough to navigate for a while.
And another question is that when you are applying to the grant for like SBIR, then you need to solve the problem of the IP transfers, or you just can at first apply for that kind of fund with even the time yet that is the limited degrees.
So we initially applied without anything, I think. I think we did a letter of intent after we had submitted. So it's not like you have to have a letter of intent on file to submit an SBIR. I mean, if you're working towards creating a company, you need to be on that track to making sure you secure the technology. But it's not like a trigger effect. You have to have LOI and then you can press submit on your grant. It can happen either order.
I think the biggest thing you need, and maybe you'll disagree with me, but would be letters of support from industry or potential customers. And so I think that's more important than the IP. You can talk about IP strategy, but I think what they really want to see, at least for the NSF, is whether someone actually wants this product. And so when we didn't get the SBIR, the first time we applied, the biggest critique was you don't have enough letters. When we reapplied, we made sure we had plenty of letters to cover the various concerns. That was really helpful for us the second time.
Yeah, I believe we did, we had a letter of intent or some sort of letter from Berkeley saying, we're negotiating exclusive license, and then the phase 2 application, I think we had actually negotiated the terms of the license, and that was part of our application. I think it might not be such a big concern, coming from a place like Berkeley where tech transfer has such a, I think Berkeley tech transfer has a pretty good reputation for being friendly towards founders. I will say though that, I agree that generally customer letters are super important and that the IP stuff is less of a concern. But Ruth, our program director, definitely is tough on IP. So I'm glad that you've negotiated that stuff going into the phase 2.
I think the phase 2, I think it's more important.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. The phase 1, it's does someone actually want this product?
And for us, for the NIH, the most important part were clinical supporters. So having a clinician or somebody on your team, whether or not it be your actual core startup team, but somebody on that grant that can give a clinical insight in a way that we can't, because we're not MDs or ODs or DOs, something like that. Because NIH is very clinically focused, so they want to know how is your technology going to help patients. And so having that person on our team is what got us acceptance both times, is really having that firm person who gave their letter of support saying, I'm fully on board with this, happy to work with the team, here's my experience in MS or concussion or whatever it might be.
So you talked about conversations with potential customers and even letters from them. It's one thing to find those potential customers, but how do you actually get face-to-face time or on a call with them? How do you get them to actually sit down and lead towards those kind of deliverables that you might need?
I would say most people are more than happy to talk to you and help out. Not everybody will be, but most people don't even get back to you, especially if it's a cold email or something. If you have a personal connection, that's a huge help, and most of those people will get back to you. And you kind of ask for, maybe 10 minutes of time to chat on the phone, and usually it'll end up being more than that. But yeah, you might do, a phone conversation or two, and then come back in a few months and ask for a letter of support or something like that, and you would draft that letter and then maybe make some modifications to it. So in my experience, most people were more than happy to talk and provide some support.
We had an interesting experience doing some of our customer interviews early on, talking with clinicians, and some of them would be like, oh, if I'm talking to you, do I get equity? Or like, oh, if I'm talking to you, do you want to pay me? And so there's some fine line, I'm sure, between finding people who are super open and willing and those who are not. Those were very few, but when they came up, we were like, wow, really? Like, wow. But the most fruitful conversations, as he had mentioned, are usually through a warm intro. So you have a clinician you're working with for your grant. He's a key opinion leader. He knows many key opinion leaders in the field. He allows you to do some intros and talk to them. And then really through networking is how you create that group of people that you can use.
And also, like, introducing yourself, especially now while you're in grad school or a postdoc, introducing yourself as a researcher at UC Berkeley goes a long way. If you lead off with, I'm a founder of a company or something like that, then it might put certain impressions in people's minds.
Yeah.
But especially while you're a postdoc or a grad student, you have, usually a much more warm reception, and people have, lower expectations.
I think that's really good advice. Like, all of my emails during the sort of customer interview thing was like, I'm a scientist at UC Berkeley. People love to talk to scientists at UC Berkeley. It's a real deal.
I think the @berkeley.edu email got way more hits than anything else.
Totally.
And you can be very honest, say like, oh, I come from academic science. I'm really interested to learn about how things work in industry and what are the big concerns that you have. And people are happy to talk.
Yeah, and I'll say I met a bunch of the people that eventually wrote letters at conferences. So that's like a very good, because that's a group that has really been selected, like self-selected as interested in new technology, because that's why they're at the conference. So yeah, two of the people that wrote my phase 1 NSF SPI or a letter, I met at that conference. They were like wanted to follow up on the science we were working on. So I got an email address from them. We shot some emails back and forth, and like Alex said, you send them a letter that's like, this is the letter. Can you, tweak it as whatever you want? But otherwise, like, if you wanted to sign it, just go ahead and sign it. And even then, with people that you had built relationships with, you gotta email them a couple times to get them to actually sign it and follow through. But they're very willing. It doesn't cost them anything, It's just the time that it takes for them to print it out, sign it, and then PDF it back to you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and kind of following up on that, so, one of our letters and one of our first customers actually came from, a conference I went to. I went to this conference just to meet one person, at Davis, drove there for the day. And that was my one goal, make this connection, and then, that'll lead to bigger things. And that ended up leading to a letter and, our first customer. So I would say, go out of your way to build those connections. If you're thinking about starting a company, you can start now and make your goal being, every week, I'm going to do one phone call or meet one new person in this area. And that's a good way to start building a network.
Yeah, that's funny. Like the NSF phase 1, they in addition to making you do all these customer interviews, they also make you watch these videos. They're like business videos. Did you have to do this with Steve? So Steve Blank is this professor at Stanford who he has this one thing that like recurs and recurs and recurs, and it's get out the building, because like all the as an entrepreneur, all the answers that you need to know are outside of the building. Like, you can't answer the questions inside the building. So I also have found that, sometimes it feels like the best way to make progress is just like put my head down and sit in front of my computer but I have to like keep reminding myself. And as a scientist, that's very appealing because you realize that work leads to results, but then as an entrepreneur, it's more like the more you get out of the building, the more you appreciate that there are shortcuts to getting to the destinations that you're really trying to get to, and you can move quite a bit faster if you just make those connections. So a lot of times I'll go to a conference, just like Alex was saying, like just to make one connection, like there's an investor there that I really want to meet, so like I'll go to the conference, and but yeah, gotta definitely get out the building, and it'll be easy once you do.
I think kind of the conflict of interest thing, I've been curious is there like a strict guidelines, like once you're incorporated, can you not use certain things at UC Berkeley, or is there like they're sort of lenient on that sort of thing where the resources are, the UC Berkeley resources are involved?
If there's UC Berkeley resources involved, it would belong to UC. So if, for example, I incorporated and had a letter of intent and then did more work in Berkeley using all their resources and tried to claim that as the company's work, that wouldn't be okay. Because I used all the university resources, I used the lab space, I might have used their chemicals, whatever. It's still UC. So anytime you would use a UC resource, that couldn't be claimed for them.
I don't know that much about the history of Genentech, but my understanding is that they stole everything from the lab and just used it to start the company, and they were just mercilessly, but they ended up, building a massive company out of it and then buying a building for UCSF, so I think you can go either way. I think there's an argument for doing everything super squeaky clean and making sure you stake your stuff off so that UC Berkeley or whoever doesn't come back to. But also sometimes you just need to get something done, and we definitely went the route of trying to get out of the lab as soon as we could. But I don't think you should let that be an impediment to developing the product. That's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I think you can spend a lot of time trying to create that hard separation, and there may or may not be a good reason for that, especially if it's, in my case, it was, technology owned by Berkeley anyways, and so they already had all the rights to it, and so I wasn't super concerned about that technology. But when we went to develop new technology, we made sure that new technology was kind of siloed off from the Berkeley stuff.
How does are there like any major differences that kind of pop out between academic life and once you start a company, either in like your personal life or in like your workday life?
Yes. I think, now it's a lot more of just talking to people. Charles had mentioned you can be a scientist, sit in front of your computer and crank out results. And if you do that as an entrepreneur, you go nowhere. So for me, it's been just a big transition in terms of being in a lab and doing engineering work. And now I'm out talking to customers, you're talking to investors, you're talking to future potential partners. You're kind of hyping up what you do to everyone that you talk to. Because really every connection you make, you don't know who else they know. And so just having that sort of thought process of sharing ideas with the world and making it be the everyday goal of seeing one new person or meeting one new person really does make a difference. And it's definitely gotten us to each point that we've gotten to just through that get out of the building. And NIH didn't require those videos, so I haven't seen that yet, but it totally rings true in terms of how the lifestyle is very different.
I find that the workload sort of ebbs and flows. I will say that if you go through a period of fundraising, for example, like you can't put your phone down because there's this kind of culture around like if you're fundraising, the potential partner, the VCs, basically they want to ask you a bunch of questions about the business and they want you to produce a bunch of documents about the business. And I think that the way you, like the sort of time frame in which you respond, they take as a proxy for how hardworking you are. So this culture when you're fundraising, like you always have to have your phone, like your email open and your phone and your text and everything. Having said that, you know, that doesn't last that long, but I felt like, you know, that took a year off my life, just like going through that 2-month process or 3-month process. But then, apart from that, definitely meeting with folks, like a lot more talking, a lot more. I got some really nice, headphones that I can have really good that has a great microphone, so I can have great conversations on. Like those are the kinds of things that make the difference. But like that's kind of how the landscape of your life changes. Like you're on the phone a lot. You're hosting people at your lab, or you're going to visit people, going to visit customers. So that's definitely, you're like flying all over the country. That's can be pretty miserable as well. Those are sort of the like, you know, being a scientist, being a postdoc is an amazing lifestyle, and something that you should really appreciate while you're a graduate student or postdoc. But a lot less regularity with everything.
And I always used to feel like if there was a day when I was a postdoc where something didn't work, it was like, extra long lunch. Now it's like if it doesn't work, I'm like, well shoot, we have to fix this now. And there's much more of an urgency, I think, sometimes to that when it's your baby and you're trying to get funded and make progress.
Yeah, it's more urgency. It's not next week. It's like, okay, we figure it out now.
Yeah.
But one of the really cool things about it is you can go on a business trip or make a phone call, and there's still a bunch of other people making progress. You know, so I think that's super exciting when you're away from the lab or away from research for a little while, and you come back and the problem is solved. You know, and that's very different from working as a postdoc. Like if you're not doing every little thing, you know, it doesn't move forward. But in a company, because you have that team, you know, everyone is pushing it forward, even if your attention is somewhere else for a little while.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Like any optimal number of partners to start with, like not more than a certain number, not less than another one, in order to actually get the work done and not get too complex.
I think it's definitely been easier with 2. Sharing the burden with a co-founder is great. I haven't really seen teams more than 3 or 4 in existence, I don't think. But I thought 2 was awesome. Like for me, that was the perfect amount. We could bounce ideas off each other. There wasn't so many people that we had to get a huge consensus. I really enjoyed having a co-founder.
Yeah, we have 4 co-founders, including myself. One who has been like a bit less involved in the last year or so. But the way, so my advisor from when I was a postdoc, he founded or was part of founding several companies. And what he said to me is he was like, startup is team sport. Gotta find, you know, other people to do it with me. And I think 2 is a team. So, but I think, like Alex, I know that I really admire that you're able to sort of, you know, be the sole founder. And I know a couple people that, you know, have, like the mentor that I was telling you about earlier, you know, he's a sole founder. It's super impressive when people can do it, but I think it's easier for everyone if you can find at least one co-founder, for sure.
Yeah, I would do at least one. The other thing I would say is, you know, working with a professor as a co-founder might not be the best idea. So some people do that.
Good point.
But your professor has a full-time job. You know, they're teaching and doing research and doing a bunch of other stuff. So I would tend to advise against that for most people. You know, there could be a unique situation where it makes sense, but probably most of the time they're better off making connections and maybe being on some sort of scientific advisory board, but not actually a co-founder.
Got a follow-up question for that. Like, so I was like wondering like if I should include the like advisor as a co-founder or the like scientific advisor. I know like some people like just exclude the advisors and then start the company by the teams like outside of their advisor. So is there the benefit of like having the advisor as a scientific advisory board or something? Like is that like just for the connections like through them or like what do you think like the good point of like having them?
I think it depends what you're looking for. You know, your advisor is not going to be at the bench doing work. They're not going to be making a whole bunch of calls for you, but maybe they have a bunch of really good connections. Or maybe they have some experience raising money and they can offer some good advice about that process. Or maybe they just have some new ideas to develop the technology. There's a lot of things they can do that are probably not fitting with them having the role as co-founder. You know, a co-founder should be working 50 or 60 hours a week probably. So my advice would be probably not, but they can still be involved. I've heard some stories where advisors were co-founders, and then when companies went out to raise money, the VCs actually wanted the advisor to be off from the co-founder. And so they had to make some changes at that point because the structure didn't make sense for an advisor to have 30 or 40%, but not actually be working more than 5 hours a week.
So I've heard that basically every founder should be also a salesman. So how do you describe your development from like a lab nerd to a salesperson? And how your co-founders did they also share that sailing experience, or did they also develop in that?
I mean, for us it was unique in that we both like to present, but we didn't know necessarily how to present our science in a way that was relatable to everyone. So I remember the first time we had tried to present the science in a business way, and people were like, wait, we don't get what that is. Wait, what's that? We were like, darn it, okay. And so really going back and being able to explain what you do to your grandma is really important in terms of like your first 2-sentence pitch, and then people know what you're talking about. And so we found that just to be kind of fun, and I do think you have to be a salesman, because if you're not excited and pumped and getting other people excited about what you're doing, you're not going to get the investors or the customers or the partners. And so they're really, I do think that is a perfect phrase, because for the most part, I mean, early founders are your first sales team. You don't hire on a sales team until you've shown some traction. And so you have to be that person.
I think we haven't done a round of fundraising. We did a little bit of equity from an accelerator. But I think a lot of times people are queuing off of your own excitement and your own engagement. They're not the expert, you are. So you have to be really excited. You have to be confident that it's going to work. Otherwise, they won't have that confidence. And so in our case, it's been more about finding some corporate partners to do some projects with. And so it's been not a challenge, but coming from the academic world, you tend to be very skeptical about stuff. We think it's like this, but we're not sure. We need to do more experiments and stuff like that. So I've sort of had to play up the confidence a little bit and say, we think it's this way because we have these great results, and we're going to be able to take this forward and apply it to your project, and it's going to work out well. So I definitely had to come at it with more confidence than I was used to, as a grad student or a postdoc. But because the technology has worked well for us, we've been able to sort of build that confidence from a technology perspective because we know it works well. So that's been able to come across well for me when I meet with people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you have to learn. Or I mean, I was definitely not a salesman, or I didn't have a single sales bone in my body. And then I read a lot of books about sales, and now I'm just sort of hacking it, But I think if you can learn how to do, I don't know what you're studying, but whatever it is more complicated than learning how to do sales. So I would, I would recommend just like getting your hands on some books, trying to get around people that are really excellent salesmen. One of my friends just happens to be like an amazing salesman. I just like study him, study how he does, how he operates, how he thinks, and all that stuff. And then, yeah, I'm like, do my best. but that is a huge part of your job as an early founder, for sure.
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, you can do a lot without being the best salesman ever. So like building that network, investing time in relationships, getting a warm intro to people, like all of that stuff, doing your homework, replying really fast to emails, being on top of things. All of that goes a long way, and that probably goes most of the way there in many situations. And I think that's in some ways, more important than being a perfect salesman. Because if you're not prepared for a meeting, it's not going to go well, even if you're the most charismatic person.
And I related a lot to what you said about, as a scientist, you're used to saying, well, here's how this is going to work, but here's 10 possible reasons why it could fail, and here's everything on the table. And that was something we had to learn very quickly. That does not sell. You need to be confident in your technology and support reasons why you think it's going to work. And you can leave out all the, but if it's cloudy on a Thursday and then the car, you can leave out all the what if scenarios. And that was really important for us to learn, because one of my first critiques was, well, you were very truthful, but that didn't get me excited. And so that was like hitting a nail on the head in terms of like, I told them, here's what we want to do, and here's why we think it would work, but it wasn't in a confident enough way to be the salesy part of it. And it's not my personality to like go around door to door with a dirty broken mop and be like, this mop work is amazing. Like, I'm not going to go do that. But there's truth in, in creating the hype about your product and what the vision is. You don't have to be the 10-year projection vision now, but you have to be able to connect the dots.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you just look at all the great successful entrepreneurs when they, and you'll just see the exact same thing that you guys are describing, like, the first iPhone that came out, I don't know if you guys remember this, but it didn't work, and they had to set up like this special room that got like boosted signals so that they could invite the press in and use the like prototype iPhones to show that it worked. Like, but the whole time Steve Jobs was out there telling everybody how amazing and how transformative it was going to be, and eventually they got there. And I mean, same with like if you look at Tesla, like, that's another great example of the vision coming first and stuff really being very broken and very low quality stuff, but ultimately they sort of like fake it till you make it, and you get there. I don't know if that's fair to say. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it.
I know there's the NSF's the good program for the startup, the I-Corps. So it is kind of very long, very good studying selling programs. Could you share some experience about the I-Corps? What is the advantage and what is the good point to join the programs?
I mean, when you think about product market fit, that's going to be your selling point. And so to dedicate 2 or 3 months to figuring that out in the beginning will save you years of what you could have done to do, fundraising. You go to prototyping, you get it out in the real world, nobody wants to use it. So like 2 to 3 months in the beginning to really figure that out, I think is awesome. And I think I-Corps even gives like $50K during that time to help you with those interviews. Like, they're really trying to help your company figure out if this is what people want. Because far too many times you can get people who think they know what others want, and they create this thing and it's out in the world and nobody buys it. And so I think it's super important.
Yeah, I think you need to do some sort of a customer discovery process. It could be I-Core. I did a mini version of it through the NSF SBIR program. But sort of the curriculum is all online, so these Steve Blank videos are all on YouTube. There's a bunch of websites that cover this process. And I had sort of known about it, I had done some of it, and then for me personally, the big advantage of going through the NSF program was actually just having a deadline and saying, you have to have 30 interviews done by this date. And then I went out and got it done. And so the curriculum is there. You know, you can start tonight if you want to, and if you're serious about it, you probably should just start talking to people right away. And you know, enroll in I-Corps, apply for I-Corps. That's great, but don't wait. You know, start now.
And NIH has its own program too, which is what we had done. It was Coulter Foundation, they called it C3I. And that was really awesome for us. There wasn't quite as many interviews as NSF, I think it was like 65 instead of 100, but they took us through other steps of medical device that NSF wouldn't. But I think it's perfect, as he mentioned, you don't need a certified thing to do it, just do it.
Any else questions? Yeah, getting close to the end. So thank you guys again.